Good morning. My name is Daniel Cornwall. I'm an Internet and Technology Consultant with the Alaska State Library, and I'd like to welcome you to today's monthly Tech Talk. And today we're going to cover some tips on customizing your wireless network. Many libraries have Wi-Fi access for their patrons, and some of them set it up themselves and so know what's going on. Others may have inherited a network, know that there's a router in there somewhere. So this is going to assume that you don't necessarily have knowledge of the equipment in your library and work up from there. We're also going to cover a few tips that we will hope will be new to you. So before we go on, I want to highlight our learning objectives. It looks like a lot, but the first 4 points are just all about finding your manual and figuring out how to see your wireless router interface. So that's probably more of like one task than the 4 that are listed there. We're also going to cover 2 things which you may not know that you could do with your Wi-Fi network. One of them is hook up a hard drive for group storage or access, and this could have some bandwidth saving issues we'll talk about later. And we'll talk about a couple of ways that if you want to give your patrons quick and easy printing, it can be done. The metering of printing is a whole nother discussion. And then finally, we'll cover a slightly advanced topic called quality of service, which is one technique that you can use for selectively prioritizing or downgrading specific internet chat from your libraries. So I'm going to move on to our next slide. So let me ask, how many of you know where your router is? If you could just type it in the chat. Because I have worked with people who like, yes, I know we have Wi-Fi somewhere. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, this slide hopefully will be helpful to you. Generally speaking, the internet is going to come out of the wall in a jack, and there may be 1 or 2 boxes. Back in the day, there would have been 2 boxes. There would have been your modem, which would have been the device directly plugged into the wall, and it might have some openings in the back, jacks for Ethernet, and one of them might be plugged into a wireless router, which was this box that always had like little Martian ears on it to broadcast the wireless internet signal. But starting several years back, you started seeing combined modem routers, and basically what that means was you had a device that you could plug directly into the wall for your internet, and then it would also serve as a wireless access point. So now what you're looking for, you're still looking for something that's near the wall, and according to these pictures, it might have antennas on it. It might look like a box laying horizontal. It might look like a little mini tower. So have a look around your library for one of those. And it'll hopefully also say the make and model number, like in the lower right-hand corner. This is a Cisco Linksys E2500, and that is a router I had at home. So I went ahead and took a picture of it. If after this class you walk around and you're still not seeing anything familiar, kind of take pictures of anything that looks vaguely electronic and send them to me, and we could probably work out what's the router. But hopefully this will give you enough instruction. If you're lucky enough to have routers with antennas, then that'll definitely be your wireless access point. So that's step one, actually finding your wireless router, assuming you have one. And if your patrons have a Wi-Fi network to log into, you do have a router in there somewhere. Does that make sense of what to look for? Okay, thanks, Rebecca. So basically, once you find your router, write down the manufacturer, and it'll be something like Cisco or Netgear or Amped. There's a couple of different routers. In preparation for this workshop, I asked people to send me router model numbers if they were able to find them, and I heard from two libraries. They both had Netgear routers. So a little later, when I go to specific examples, because they vary from vendor to vendor, I'm going to be doing them for Netgear. But so once you have a model number, what you can do is you can either type the make and model number like Amped RTA 1750 manual into your favorite search engine and see what comes up. And hopefully you get a hit from the manufacturer. Or you could actually go to your manufacturer's website, and that's almost always going to be www.yourmanufacturername.com. So like if you wanted to find Netgear, it would be www.netgear.com. I should also say that with this class, there is a class guide at lam.alaska.gov/wireless, and I'll go ahead and type in that address into chat so you'll have it. It was also on the first slide, and it'll be on the last slide. But this address here, it links to like 5 of the major wireless router manufacturers. But so what I'm saying is if you don't go to a search engine with your model number, you can go to one of these support sites, and we're going to pretend like we're going to the Netgear support site to find a manual. I'm going to click on the next slide. So let's say we know we have a Netgear router, and so I go to www.netgear.com, and then I click on support, which is in the upper right-hand corner. The exact spot where support is going to be is going to vary from manufacturer, although a lot of them do tend to put it somewhere on the right-hand side of the page, just because that's where people tend to look. And once we click on support, we get a little pop-up menu. And because I'm specifically looking for a manual to the router that I just found, I'm going to click on Download Center. And then here they give us the option on the right to browse and select your product, or you can enter a product name and model number. And so I took the model number of one of the routers that I was that one of the libraries reported and typed it into the product name model number search box. Clicked on the little magnifying glass to actually make it search, and then I got a list of documentation or guides on the left, and then software updates on the right, which I wasn't going to worry about for now. So I decided, and let's see. Okay, I was trying to use a highlighter. Okay. So I went ahead and clicked on I'm going to go ahead and click on the user manual, which I just highlighted. And then I got a manual in PDF format. And once you find this, I would go ahead and save it direct to your computer, so you don't have to keep searching every time that you want to see the manual. So is it clear how to find your manual once you find your model and make of your router? Or are there questions on that? Okay. So the next step is that for most routers, in order to change your settings, you log into it with a web browser. And you don't have to be connected to the internet at large. You just have to be connected to your router. Now, the thing is exactly where you go varies by manufacturer, which is why I really emphasize finding your router's dashboard first. Now, if you didn't find your manual right away, or you know a little bit about wireless routers and you just want to quickly check a few settings, what you can do is try some of the addresses here on if you have to guess. The most common address turns out to be 192.168.1.1. And the whole 192.168 range are what's called private IP addresses, which means they're only visible inside of your network, inside the library. So it's not an address that you want to report to vendors if you're having database problems, because they're usually looking for what's called an external IP address, which there are different tools to find. But there are some lookup tools that'll give you a 192.168 address, and that's not helpful for database troubleshooting. It is, however, usually very helpful for accessing your router dashboard. So if you find the correct IP address, or this routerlogin.com, it'll sometimes work. And the class guide that I posted has some other vendor-specific settings for where to log in. You will get in most cases, a login pop-up that'll say, please enter your ID and password. And for the vast majority of wireless routers, when it comes from the factory, and that's the setting. Well, actually, two things. One, if you're really lucky, your predecessor not only changed the default password because it's kind of silly to something memorable and kept it on file, and then I would look in your files for anything wireless, and hopefully the login information is there. If it's not there, it's been lost, whatever, I would first go for the default ID and password, because a lot of people just everywhere. It's not something peculiar to libraries. A lot of folks do this. Don't change their defaults, and so the default ID is admin, just admin, and then from the factory, the password is usually either password or admin. And try those credentials, and if you get in, that's great, although I would strongly recommend that you change the administrative password, because this factory default login is widely available on the internet and could allow someone mischievous in your community to connect to your Wi-Fi and change a lot of settings lock everyone else out of the Wi-Fi network, and some other things you probably don't want to have happen. So if the default information gets you into your dashboard, go ahead and examine the dashboard. But before you leave, go ahead and change that administrative password. Now, if you're in a situation where your tech predecessor was, had the foresight and wisdom to change the password, but not the wisdom to leave it somewhere for their successors, what you can do in a worst case scenario is that you can reset the router to its factory settings, which will allow you to log in with the default ID and password. How you set your router to factory settings really varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. And I'd like to give you just a moment to read through this slide of the different variety of ways to reset a factory router. So I'll give you just a minute or two. And if you could just type in the chat when you're done reading the slide. Thanks. I'm happy to say that the reset directions in the manual are accompanied by pictures, so it should be more obvious of what to do than particularly with the TP-Link reset procedure. Could be kind of confusing with just this one sentence, but there is a section in the manual that shows the pictures of what to look for. So any questions on how to get into your router's dashboard, or if you have to, resetting it to factory settings? And the reason why I don't suggest that you start with these is that it's possible that whoever set up your Wi-Fi network to begin with did some helpful customizations. Maybe you only wanted the Wi-Fi operating during library hours, for instance. And if you do a factory reset, it erases everything. So you have to start from scratch. Whereas if you're able to get in with the default ID, admin password, or if even better, you find the actual admin password to the network, then you can look at the existing settings and then change them how you like. And one other thing that I probably should try to make clearer is there are two sets of passwords to any Wi-Fi network. And what we've been talking about now is the administrative interface. And it's always going to require an ID and a password. And that's something that only your technology person, if you have one, and one other person, just to make sure that at least two people know the administrative information at all times, should have that. But none of your patrons should ever have access to the administrative settings of your Wi-Fi network. When we talk about secured Wi-Fi networks with a password in a little bit, That's just going to be a password, and it is something that you should give to your patrons if your network has a password. Was that clear? Or just say if it's not. Okay, so what we're going to do next is your router may well be different, but because we wanted to keep this to an hour, I'm going to show you the administrative interface to Netgear. And things are going to look similar in the sense that you are going to have a space that talks about your wireless network, what you give to your patrons. If it's a modern router, it'll probably have something about sharing. We're not going to discuss them today, even though they were in the very initial email message about parental controls, at least nothing beyond setting times for your Wi-Fi network to be on. So the menu may have pictures like this. It may just be lines of text, but they'll cover the different types of subjects. And if you've downloaded your manual ahead of time, you might want to read through it a bit just to see how your dashboard is going to look. So your dashboard is going to have some section on wireless, and then there's some things that you probably don't want to change, but two things that you probably do want to change is when you have a mobile device and you scan for Wi-Fi networks, when you see the list of names, those are called the SSID, and it's something S identifier. And in default, it often comes up with either some random name or the name of the manufacturer. Like Netgear usually starts up with Netgear, although in this particular example, it shows up as RF Lab. I have two recommendations, one positive and one negative. One is I think it's best if you change this SSID to the name of your library, or if your library name is long, enough of the library name that people know what institution it's coming from. It's very clear branding for you. People get reminded of it every time they log into your Wi-Fi, and it also helps distinguish your network from others. So I would definitely recommend your library name or a part of your library name. What I don't recommend, just don't call your network free Wi-Fi. And the reason you shouldn't do that is because that is a name that's actually fairly popular with hackers. And if you look at computer security blogs and literature, people are generally advised not to connect to things that just say free Wi-Fi, because often they're run by hackers who are gleaning personal information and passwords off of you for the privilege of using their network. So just stick with your library name, or if you have constraints from your city, you could follow those. The other thing is, in this example, the security option is listed as none, which basically means that somebody goes to your network, they see the network name, they click on it, and they're connected. Now, this is extremely convenient, and there are libraries that do that. Actually, I have to admit that the Alaska State Library does that because we don't actually own our own Wi-Fi network. We have a deal with GCI where they offer a slow but completely free to us wireless connection that we offer to our patrons. And then that's compensation for them running a GCI TurboZone network, which is much faster but is only available to GCI subscribers. So on that, basically donated network, we don't have the option to put security on it. But if you control your Wi-Fi, I'd strongly urge you to put some security on it. And basically, it could be any of the options here. What it'll do is it'll allow you to generate a password. You can make this one pretty easy. Don't make it any of the other passwords that you use at your library, and then post it publicly in within the library. And the reason why you want to do this is that putting any kind of security on your network will encrypt the communications between laptops and mobile devices, between them and the internet, and it will keep hackers who would have to be in the library, to be fair, from scanning the traffic that goes across the network. Whereas if you don't put any security on the network, there are programs that someone could use if they're physically resident in the library to see what websites people were going to. So the two things here under your basic settings are change your network name, the SSID, and then give your patrons the option of a password, because that really is considered best practice. Any questions on that bit? Okay. So the next thing that I'd like to do is there's different schools of thought with libraries, and both of them are equally valid in my view. One is we never want to turn the Wi-Fi off, because if somebody wants to come to our parking lot after we're closed and surf the internet, that's still a public service that we can offer, and so we just want to leave it on all the time. Another and equally defensible point of view is that the wireless service is a service specifically of the library and should only be available during library hours. And most modern browsers will allow you to set a schedule. It depends on the manufacturer whether it's times that the Wi-Fi is blocked or or times where the Wi-Fi is open. And that is a important distinction that you should understand before you go into your schedule. Where the schedule is depends. Here in Netgear, and this is most Netgear routers, you log into your dashboard, you click on the Advanced tab, then on the left-hand side, you click on Security, and then that gives you Schedule. And in this particular instance, it's telling us days to block. Now, some manufacturers would say days that Wi-Fi is on, and I prefer that, because if the settings were days and times that were on, you could just put in your library schedule. But since it says days to block, you need to do a little bit more thinking. So in this case, I say that I want to block it every day, and then in the time of day, And even though no library is exactly like this, I'm assuming that the library is going to be open every day from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. And that's just to make this example easy, because under Netgear, it's harder to do really fine-tuned customization. So I would, in this example, because I want the Wi-Fi open during the library hours, I'd only block it when it was closed. So I would block it from 6:01 p.m., although I'd put it into the 24-hour clock time that Netgear wants, which would be 18:01, and then I would run it through 12:59 so that it stopped blocking or turned the Wi-Fi back on a minute before the library opened. If you wanted it open all the time during the week, but wanted it blocked on the weekends, you could do that. You would uncheck the every day, and then you would just check Sunday and Saturday, and then your Wi-Fi wouldn't be available on the weekends, but it would be available 24/7 on the other weekdays. If you choose to restrict your schedule, it's important to keep browsing around the screen for where it says time zone. Like for here, it says Pacific time. So if we just saved and let the router do its thing, it would be opening up the Wi-Fi an hour early and then closing it an hour early, which is not what we want, particularly closing it an hour early. So just find your time zone and set it to Alaska time. And depending on your manual, there's going to be a different section of where to set your Wi-Fi availability. And if it's not clear to you where to set it, and you have found your router manual, then your router model, send me the router model and I can dig up a procedure for you. I'm very happy to do that. Are there questions how, at least in Netgear, how you would set the hours that your Wi-Fi was available? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. And if questions come up afterwards, feel free to email or call me. Now I'd like to talk about something that I actually didn't know before a week or two ago. It turns out with most modern wireless routers, and by modern I'm talking about things manufactured in like the last 3 years, you have the option of hooking up an external hard drive to your wireless network. And basically that would, and you can set it up so that any of your patrons can either look at files on it or save files to it. I'm not sure there's many use cases where you'd want them saving to central storage. Although, like, if you had some sort of photo contest and they wanted to, like, upload pictures to your library storage but not be on your actual staff network, they could do this central storage. But one thing that could be, if you're in a bandwidth-poor community and there's people having to download fairly large forms, like I'm thinking of tax time, people downloading instruction booklets or long forms, which can get kind of high in how many megabytes there are, and it could take minutes and minutes to load. You might want to consider saving some of those commonly used forms to an attached USB drive on your wireless network, and then point your patrons to your collection on that hard drive instead of going out to the general internet, because you'd be able to get the forms from that USB drive a lot faster than going, say, to the IRS and downloading it again. And it can also, and then that leaves more of your bandwidth available for others. Looking to tell whether you're, without a manual, you can tell whether your router is able to support this feature just by picking it up and looking at the back of it. There's always going to be, assuming that it's functional, there's always going to be one cable already plugged into it, and it's going to go back to the wall, and that's the one to the internet. There's almost always going to be like 1 to 4 other jacks that look a little like phone jacks, except they're actually Ethernet connections, and that's where you can plug things in. Like computers directly into the router, and there are a few reasons why you might want to do that. If it also has another connection in the back that looks smaller and flatter, that's going to be a USB connection, and that means that you could plug in an external hard drive or a thumb drive and then use that to be available to your patrons. So does that idea sound clear? And here's a couple of reasons that you might want to put on a flash drive or external drive. I mentioned that the IRS forms or some of the state reports, that if they get a lot of use from patrons year to year, you might be better off storing them locally on your wireless network than the open internet. If you've got digital files that you're not sure that you think they are of interest to your patrons, but you're not sure if you have the rights to put them on the open internet, you could store them on your local drive, and then that way only people within the library would be able to view them, but they could view them anywhere in the library on their own devices. And so that might be a solution for say, local history materials that you've digitized. Although I say this as, my not a lawyer hat. But it certainly is okay. In my layman idea, it would certainly be less liability than just posting them willy-nilly on the internet if you don't know that you have permission or don't know they're in the public domain. So questions on why you might want to store stuff on a local drive, or how to tell whether your router is capable of doing that? Okay, thank you. Want to quickly show you how you would look at the storage in Netgear. On a Netgear router, the feature is called ReadyShare, and the ReadyShare does both external hard drives, flash drives, USB storage, and it also connects USB printers, which is one of 2 ways that you could connect a printer to your wireless network. And another thing, like I said, here you can read access is whether your patrons could actually look at the files. Write access would be whether they could add files or change files. And you can actually set passwords for both of this. So let's say that you had a set of materials, say a local photo collection that you had volunteers adding to. So you could put no password to to read the collection, so anybody on your Wi-Fi network would be able to see what pictures are already there. But you only want your volunteers to contribute photos. Then for write access, you would set a password, and only people with that password would actually be able to add photos to that local drive. Okay, a couple more settings I wanted to show. If you were so inclined, there's some technical things that you could do with this shared resource, including making it accessible on the internet, although I wouldn't recommend doing that. And again, these are specifically for Netgear. If you don't have a Netgear router, the screens and procedures are going to be kind of different. And then this is where you would actually create a name of the network folder, like, local photo project or whatever. Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry that on a lot of this I basically say your mileage may vary, but it really does vary upon the manufacturer, and it is really, for the most part, really easy to download the manuals. And again, I'm happy to interpret what's in the manuals, or to check out what's going on with your router. We actually have approaches where if you're already on the internet, we can actually use WebEx I can use WebEx to have you show me your screen, and we could actually work through the settings together if that's something that you'd want to do. So now, assuming there's no questions, I want to briefly talk about printing on a wireless network, because that is something that was specifically asked for. And the two options I'm going to talk about today are simply getting a printer on the network and allowing people to connect to it and print to it freely. It would be like a whole nother workshop to cover systems that would allow you to charge people for printing off the wireless network. And most of those metering systems tend to be pretty expensive. So the two ways that you can do it, these days there are a lot of wireless printers out there, meaning that there are printers that can independently connect to a wireless network. I have one at home. It works really great. It's even a couple rooms away from my wireless router at home, but it still works great. So if you want to provide printing to your Wi-Fi patrons, that's the number one way that I'd go, because once you have it connected, once you have a wireless printer connected to your wireless network, it becomes like any other network printer. And so people can connect to it and print. Now, how they connect to it and print depends on whether they have a Windows machine or a Macintosh machine. And on the class guide, I have a section on connecting your patrons to your printer, and I'm just going to drop in the address again. Now, if you have a printer lying around that's not wireless and you don't want to go out and buy a whole new printer, I completely respect that. There are routers, and again, check your manual, that will allow you to plug in your a USB cord from your printer into the back of the wireless router. So your printer will have to live near your wireless router. And then it can be shared out with the network. The drawback, as opposed to a true wireless printer, is that there is a piece of software that will, from the manufacturer, that will need to be installed on every device that wants to print from the network. And so I think that's an unneeded hurdle for your patrons, at least for your patrons with wireless laptops. Now, mobile devices, whether or not you go with a true wireless printer, or if you've connected a printer with a USB cable to the back of your router, you're still going to need some sort of app. If it's a true wireless printer like mine at home, it'll be a printer-specific app. Like I have something that's called HP Print on my phone, and that allows me to print off emails and photos from my phone. If your printer is connected via USB to the back of your router, then it's probably going to be a router-specific app for your mobile device. Questions about connecting a printer to your Wi-Fi network? And a related question, is providing printing to your patrons on your Wi-Fi network something that you think you'd want to do? I did hear from one library that it was, but it varies, and it's another investment in supplies. Okay, my last topic here is slightly esoteric. It's called quality of service, and if you get AL-supported bandwidth at your library, it's something that you probably already have from your from your internet service provider, because we use a certain level of this quality of service QoS to prioritize the video going through the AL network. But if you don't get bandwidth support, then you can enable this feature in your wireless router. Not everyone does, and basically what it does is it gives priority to either certain uses or certain workstations on your network. Like, you might make video a priority so that people could stream webcasts more easily. Or you might do the opposite. If video is like a really huge bandwidth suck in your library, nobody else can do anything while somebody's watching a video, you can actually prioritize other uses and quality of service, and or restrict the amount of bandwidth that you provide to video, which will allow more of your remaining bandwidth to be used for other purposes. And the one thing I really want to emphasize is that it's basically just rearranging how people get to use your existing bandwidth. It doesn't really give you any more bandwidth than you already had. If you have a 3 megabits per second connection, it's still going to be 3 megabits, even if one use gets prioritized. And I did say services or workstations. One use case is that if you have a Wi-Fi network where one workstation, say, is specifically set aside for online learning, maybe you want to give that the most bandwidth to give people the best chance of completing their online courses, no matter what else is going on at the library at the time. And again, how it's implemented is depends on the exact manufacturer. So again, going back to the initial slides or the wireless class guide, locate your router, get its model number, find its manual, and then look up quality of service. And this is one of the screens that you get in quality of service. And so here, like if you want to place a uplink bandwidth, that controls how fast somebody can upload files. And you can change that figure here. Basically, if you're more or less satisfied with how people are using the internet and on your Wi-Fi network, I wouldn't even touch quality of service. You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if you wanted to set up a specific rule for a specific service, you'd click on this set up quality of service rule, and then that would bring up that would bring up this screen here. And you can do it by applications, you know, have people give more or less priority to YouTube or games or what have you. If you give them less priority, things will run slower, but you might have more bandwidth for other uses. Okay, that's quality of service, and that's the end of my prepared material. We still have about 5 minutes. I apologize for not leaving a little bit more time for questions. Do you have questions about anything other wireless at all? And I hope that you found at least one thing that'll be useful to you back in your libraries. And if you had anything that you wish had been covered that wasn't covered, I'd like you to email me, because it's something that we could include in a future class. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I will go ahead and stop the recording. I really want to thank you both for spending an hour of your Friday doing some lifetime learning, and hope that the information has been useful. Thank you, and have a great day.